England's villages. Thatched cottages, neatly tended gardens, the village shop, the church, tea on the lawn. It's a cosy chocolate box image recognised across the globe.
I'm Ben Robinson, and as an archaeologist, I'm fascinated by the places where we live and how they've evolved from ancient times to the present day.
For me, the story of the village isn't about sleepy rural idylls. It's one of purpose, persistence and power. And here we'll see who had that power. In this secluded valley in the middle of Dorset.
Milton Abbas is an 18th century masterpiece, picture perfect, but hiding darker secrets.
It wouldn't be here at all were it not for a social divide that gave the rich almost unfettered power over the lives of the poor. Power which allowed the landowner to wipe out an entire community in the name of fashion, self-image and control. The first thing you notice about the main street in Milton Abbas is the regularity of the houses, all built at the same time in the late 1700s. They suggest order and a neatness typical of genteel Georgian architecture. That's because Milton Abbas was built as part of a much bigger plan designed to boost the image and power of one man.
To find out why, we need to go about a mile over there and go back to a time before this village existed.
This is Milton Abbey, founded in 934 AD by King Athelstan.
This is part of the medieval monastery, the 15th century Abbot's Hall. The rest is an 18th century extension, and what an extension.
Designed by Sir William Chambers, it's in the Gothic Revival style. Ornate stonework and arches pointing to the sky mimic fine medieval architecture. This grand mansion and spectacular abbey church stand alone in the landscape.
This is no accident. It's all down to a wealthy landowner called Joseph Damer, who in 1752 made this country estate in Dorset his home.
Anne Litchfield has been exploring the life of the man who lived here.
How did he come by his wealth?
Well, he was a little bit embarrassed about that. It was his great-uncle who had entered Ireland along with Oliver Cromwell, which is actually where he bought his first baronetcy as well. So, newly titled, this man wanted all the trappings of the aristocracy. And his first step on the way was, of course, to enter politics. And at this time, only people who owned land could actually vote. And as the majority of Dorset was in the hands of a very small number of landowners, he didn't need that many votes to get elected to Parliament. And so at the age of just 21, he became the MP for Weymouth.
And instantly becomes quite a big shot around here.
He's made his mark, absolutely.
Now taking the title Lord Milton, Damer set about turning his imposing home into a fashionable rural retreat to show off to his wealthy visitors. Even King George III came to stay. As a country landowner, he also had to run a farm, but creating a showpiece was his main concern. From the top of the Abbey Church tower, you get an idea of the scale of his grand design. And to make it a reality, there was only one man with the right credentials.
The father of landscape design, Lancelot Capability Brown. And the canvas he's working on is absolutely vast. This is a massive, expansive landscape.
In 1763, Brown began creating this spectacular park all around the abbey.
By this time, Brown had already designed the landscape grounds at Blenheim Palace, Longleat and 700 acres at Petworth in West Sussex.
Out went Italian-style formal planting, in came wide open naturalistic parkland with any unsightly blemishes physically removed.
There was one blot on this landscape, the ancient sprawling town of Middleton, just down there.
Middleton would have been a typical town of the time. Noisy, bustling, smelly, full of the great unwashed, as Lord Milton might have thought. Worst of all, it was right by his back door.
It had to go.
In 1770, Lord Milton started exerting the power his wealth afforded him. He began destroying the town of Middleton.
And a clue to what he destroyed is right here, this solitary gravestone. Now, this was the parish churchyard. There should be dozens of these all over this area, but there isn't.
So where are they? Helia Exon is the custodian of Milton Abbey Church.
As you can see, we've been digging up the floors, and when we did so down here, we made a most macabre discovery. Because we dug up the far end, we found a whole load of gravestones being used as infill just to raise the level of the floor.
So
to
just
level it up.
smashed up and used as rubble?
Yeah, smashed up and used as rubble. And here we've got Viander, Vacher and Woolridge.
Oh yes, John Woolridge. And the date looks significant.
It's 1755. And we know that the Woolridges were in Middleton, and actually this family moved to Milton Abbas, because we also have records of them in Milton Abbas.
At exactly the time when these gravestones are being removed. Is it possible that relatives were actually watching these stones being smashed and used as rubble?
Yes, quite possible.
This shows what little regard Lord Milton had for the poor folk who happened to live on his land.
Getting rid of a graveyard was one thing, but clearing the entire town would prove more difficult.
We've got the original map from 1770.
Pamela and Brian Phillips from the local history group have recently discovered the actual plan Milton had drawn up before the old town was destroyed.
Now, you're taking me to a particular landmark, aren't
We
you?
are. We're heading towards what we believe is the centre of the marketplace.
OK.
We're using this detailed map to pinpoint a clue as to where the old town actually was.
I
this
think I've
hedge.
spotted it.
The base of the market cross.
Oh, yes. Good grief. Strangely shoved into a sort of hedge. Yeah, here's the square socket for the cross shaft.
That's
here.
right.
And it's a fairly monumental piece of masonry, isn't it, actually?
It is.
You wouldn't want to move it far.
Some early descriptions of the market cross have got 33 steps leading up to the cross.
33 steps.
Incredible.
This area, where the cricket pitch is now, was the marketplace. Lord Milton had every house, pub and shop in Middleton meticulously mapped, noting how long the leases of each had to run. Some properties are marked in hand, meaning he'd already taken them over. The others are ones he needed to get his hands on in order to demolish the town. And we can even see the homes of Vacher and Woolridge, whose gravestones were buried under the abbey as rubble.
And then in the covers, we've got houses here, right over there, and right against his garden wall.
That's right.
They're stealing his apples and throwing stones down his chimneys over there.
OK.
No wonder he got annoyed.
I'm getting a sense now of the sort of nuisance that he might have felt all this was. Lord
Milton's annihilation of the old town was thorough. There is hardly anything on the ground now to show where this noisy, bustling community was.
And often you find these little humps and bumps, the remnants of where houses used to be. If you can't find the houses themselves, which have obviously been cleared away, the platforms on which they stood should be evident.
The map should make finding these clues much easier.
That is a cutting for a lane, isn't it? If you were trying to get up that steep slope, you're just cutting in a little bit, making the incline somewhat less. Do you know, where those cows are sitting there, that looks a bit like a house platform to me.
It does.
It's right on the lane. It's level ground at the junction of this little lane and back street. That looks like a house platform to me. I'm going to have to get up there. I want to have a go. Do you mind if I leave?
You do what you want.
But you know the owner. He's not likely to shoot me, yeah?
I can see him coming now with his shotgun.
Oh, this is a really wide lane, this, isn't it? Running through here. You can see it running down to the slope there. There's a huge level area just here. Absolutely huge. If it's not a house site, it's going to be a garden plot with terraces running down the hillside. Oh, there's more here. There's more earthworks over here. So I think I'm standing just where a house stood before it was cleared by Lord Milton.
One resident refused to move. A lawyer in the old town called Mr. Harrison, who took Lord Milton to court and won. But the law was no match for wealth and power. An ornamental lake had always been part of Capability Brown's design. So Lord Milton simply flooded what was left of the old town, forcing Mr. Harrison out. Kate Feelish is a writer and landscape gardener specialising in the Georgian era.
I suspect of all the lakes that were created by Capability Brown in landscapes up and down the country, this is probably the most artificial, took the most effort. I mean, taking away an entire town, I think that's pretty unique.
I mean, it's certainly stunning. It's like being part of a picture, isn't it? I mean, it's like being actually part of the action.
It was a standard entertainment for house guests in the country house in the 18th century. And you would go out on a lake like this. It might be in a big boat, it might be in a small boat, slightly depended on the size of the lake. Some people had scaled down men of war. Other people would just enjoy rowing, quietly rowing on the lake. Part of what it was all about was recreating these paintings that these young men, these milordi, had brought back from Italy from their grand tour, which was a bit like a posh gap year. They had these fabulous 17th century paintings of the Roman countryside with little temples and maybe a river or a lake, and that was one of the things that they wanted to create.
So lakes like this were highly desirable, envied, and presumably much copied.
Well, the whole English landscape garden was copied up and down the country, but it was copied beyond that, everywhere from Russia through to the fledgling United States of America. And in France, it was known as Le Jardin Anglais, and even Marie Antoinette wanted one.
With the old town removed, in 1773, Lord Milton created the new village of Milton Abbas. A sanitised and smaller village designed by Capability Brown to house the farm workers and craftsmen that Lord Milton needed to look after his country estate. A showpiece to impress aristocratic visitors, but in a valley conveniently hidden from Lord Milton's view.
Because this would have been a narrower road.
John Phibbs is a leading authority on Capability Brown.
Well, Brown was an architect. However, here he didn't design the houses. They were designed by his enemy, really, Sir William Chambers, who was also employed by Damer. And Chambers then left the contract in 1774, claiming that Damer was impossible to work with. And Brown was left to design the village. And what he did is much more complicated than it looks, because the whole village is set out as a perfect serpentine, the line of beauty, with the church on one side and the almshouses on the other side, the pivot about which it turned, and then the road runs down to the lake. So it's a perfect little composition.
So we've got these houses, they're all of the same basic form.
Yeah.
They're lived in by the same sort of people.
Yeah.
Brown, unwittingly, seems to have got caught up in some sort of social engineering here. I mean, he's a landscape designer.
Well, to me, what this shows is, in the old villages, the villages were full of yeomen, and the yeomen owned a certain amount of land, and they were independent people. He was creating a new structure in which there was the boss, Lord Damer, and under him were his staff. No doctors, no lawyers, accountants, nothing like that. These were just the workers on the estate. And Fanny Burney, the novelist and diarist, she came here shortly after Brown died, and she said they all look like gentlemen's houses, but actually they appear to be inhabited by people who have fallen on hard times, something like that.
But they hadn't fallen on hard times necessarily. They were just the estate workers.
But
that's
because
who
they looked like workers. She was not familiar with the idea of a village full of people who were staff.
Let's see how luxurious it is.
I'm keen. I've never been inside an empty one before.
From the outside, these workers' cottages are designed to look impressive, but once inside, we soon discover the reality.
Oh, look at this. Oh, there's a little porch, and it looks like two front doors, so it's rather like flats. You've got a common porch, but one door there and the other one through here. Oh, there's even a separate number on the door, look. Number 11 on that door and 12 on that one.
12 on that one.
Yeah, so 2 units for sure.
Yeah.
In fact, all 36 almost identical cottages were designed to house at least 2 large families.
Original fireplace.
It's huge. The room would have been boiling hot, I'd have thought.
Little bread oven in here as well. Very important, daily bread.
Oh, yeah, and does it go on around the corner?
Yeah, it's actually quite big. I say little bread oven.
So what you do is you light the fire in that. When the fire's gone out and you've got red ashes, you put the bread in, and that means it has its own flue.
Yeah, you don't need it burning red hot, just warm enough, and hey presto, you're self-sufficient with bread. Let's have a look through here. Oh, we've got another fireplace. Oh, well, obviously the electric heater is much later. Oh, but this room, it looks like a sort of a long gallery, but actually it would have been divided into 2.
We can see where the wall was.
So this was an entirely separate house. So we've got a stair here for this house, and there's evidence that there was another stair here. So again, proof that that entrance hall led to 2 houses and another door into the front room. Let's have a look. Okay. Oh, yeah, there we go. It's almost a mirror image, isn't it? Another big fireplace, another bread oven. Actually, the more we wander around, the more this feels like quite a nice peasant house for the era.
I think it's very nice. If it was 2 families for the house, this is substantial, because they all sleep in one room upstairs, and then they have downstairs for cooking, and that's more or less it. That's the house done.
I mean, people living in rural communities, most people would have been very, very happy with this sort of thing.
Very happy, yeah.
But replacing an entire town with a designer village was a bold experiment that came with its own problems. Upstairs at number 27, there's evidence that overcrowding could well have been an issue.
Oh my goodness, there is a little range up here. That's incredible. So, and it's not just a fire, it is somewhere where you could actually cook a meal. And this seems to be evidence that actually there could have been up to 4 families in this house.
Indeed, in 1812, records show there were 36 men, women and children living in one building. And yet there was space and money for a brand new church and a fancy vicarage which came with a generous income of £40 a year.
This is polite Georgian architecture at its best, showing its respectable, fine, symmetrical facade to the street and a stone tile roof. Purbeck slate bought at great expense. You don't see this on any other building in the village. This process of creating fashionable landscapes was happening up and down the country, but it wasn't going unnoticed, even at the time. I've got a poem here by Oliver Goldsmith, and he's absolutely scathing. The man of wealth and pride takes up a space that many poor supplied. Space for his lake, his park's extended bounds, space for his horses, equipage and hounds. The robe that wraps his limbs in silken sloth has robbed the neighbouring fields of half their growth.
And here they also lost their school. Lord Milton went to great lengths to remove the grammar school from the old town. And the new village had to wait almost a century before it got its own school. Something else conspicuous by its absence in the new village of Milton Abbas was a pub.
Now, pubs, alehouses, inns, they're a feature of life for many English towns, many English villages. And in fact, here we've got leases that show that in the old town, there's a number of pubs. There's here's Richard Ham at the George and Dragon. We've got John Hallett or Hollett at the Crown. We've got William Keats. He's got the King's Arms. We've got the Red Lion. We don't find any of this in the new village. It seems that Lord Milton is determined not to have this place go to rack and ruin. Now, he's got a place in London and he's seen at first hand the havoc that the gin epidemic was causing in urban centres. He didn't want the same thing to happen here in Milton Abbas. He didn't want that ruining his perfect rural community. So there's a lease or indenture here to one John Nunn, and it's very specific. It says, he will not suffer or permit any alehouse or inn or place of entertainment. Basically, these houses shouldn't be used for fun. They shouldn't be used for public entertainment. They shouldn't be used for gatherings, because at this period, gatherings could be dangerous. Drink-fueled talk. There's a revolution happening just across the channel. Lord Milton doesn't want the local sort of brewing and fermenting trouble. No, these are going to be sober villages in sober housing, behaving like a good rural population.
It would be 14 years after Lord Milton's death before a licence was finally granted for a public house here. And right next door to the pub, there's evidence of another building which doesn't seem to fit Lord Milton's vision of Arcadia, the poorhouse. The original building's long gone, but you can see it in this drawing. From Elizabethan times, it was a legal responsibility of the parish to look after anyone who couldn't work or look after themselves. Peter Higginbottom is an expert on poorhouses and workhouses and can explain the significance of these ledgers, the village poor books.
The books here have two things in them, really. This collection of money from all the householders in the village, which you're going to pay to support the poor. And this was the ledger of all those payments to record everybody had paid their due, including the lord of the manor. He paid quite a chunk towards this whole operation. And we've also got the handouts, you might call them. It was known as out relief in its day. And every single item, whether it's a bit of cash, bread, clothing, they're all itemised in these books, showing you how much they cost and who they were given to.
This is a really interesting entry, because these are some of these sort of incidental expenses you're talking about, but it's serious stuff, because they're paying for a doctor here for taping. Taping must be bandaging,
I think
not
so,
sort
yeah.
of taping up.
Yeah.
And then brandy, I think that says, for Anne Seeger, but not for her. It's something to do with treating the wound or the sore or whatever she's
Antiseptic,
got.
maybe?
Yes.
Yeah.
And then for the doctors, eating and liquor. So they're feeding the doctor. This is all being paid for by the parish.
Yeah, so there's a whole package of medical care they're paying for. The doctors, bandages, alcohol. It's really quite a comprehensive system.
Unfortunately, it doesn't work, because here Anne Seeger's funeral charges.
Yes.
And even sadder, we get down here, for transporting Anne Seeger's children and goods to Pimporn. Is that another village?
Yeah, the children are being passed on to relatives, maybe, to look after them. which apart from, might be what's good for the children, is actually also removing the children from the books of this parish. So, it's actually reducing the bill. Really interesting. In 1776, there seemed to be far more deaths than usual in the year. And there's a clue about what's going on, because here we've got someone being paid 6 pence for cleaning the smallpox house. Yeah. And then, but down here, even more exciting, inoculation being carried out at a vast sum of money. But this is a treatment for smallpox at a really early time, isn't it? It is. Smallpox was one of the most feared diseases at this time. Organised treatment, paid for by the parish for the poor, being carried out in a systematic way. It's really interesting that that's going on at this date.
At this time, most attempts to fight smallpox involved a dose of the human virus. But a local farmer called Benjamin Jesty had noticed that milkmaids exposed to cowpox were immune to this deadly disease. He was experimenting with inoculations in Dorset 20 years before Edward Jenner, the doctor famously credited with developing the first smallpox vaccine. It's almost state-of-the-art medical treatment, isn't it?
Yeah.
Which puts a whole new perspective on this. This is the parish taking a decision, presumably with Lord Milton's acceptance, that this sum of money should be paid on this cutting-edge medical treatment.
Yeah, and again, it's another example of, the poor in this parish were not the downtrodden, mistreated individuals that we initially might have got that impression. But when you look at the detail, it's actually a whole welfare system in operation in this village. It's quite amazing.
Whether for altruistic or selfish reasons, Lord Milton wasn't alone in creating this new kind of socially engineered village. Estate villages were built across the country throughout the 18th and 19th centuries, from Holcombe in Norfolk to Enser on the Chatsworth estate in Derbyshire. As the aristocracy strove to create their orderly visions of English rural life. In Milton Abbas, today's villagers are still holding on to the idea of idyllic country life, with that most English of traditions, a tea party. It's a chance for old and new residents to meet.
I thought it'd be interesting for you to meet the newest people in the village. Mark and Jennifer, this is Mary, who's the oldest resident.
Lovely to meet you. Oh, thank you.
Many of the houses here are now second homes. And Lord Milton's grand mansion has been a boarding school since the 1950s. But Lord Milton's ultimate 18th century status symbol is still a showstopper. Whether a revolutionary stroke of genius or just a ruthless vanity project, Milton Abbas truly defines an era. A time when class division ruled people's lives. A time when those with money and power got what they wanted, and the rest of us just had to put up with it and try to survive.